moving back to the agenda and item 8, Te Kite Rukuruku and the Māori naming of parks and places. Jane, welcome, and team. Kia ora and welcome. We're in your hands.
Ai te mea tutahi mā koe pihi nera ki tō tātou matu nui te rangi ko ia te timatanga me te hakamutunga o ngā mea tato. E te rangatira e Alfe mihi ake nera kia koe tō mihi ake kia tātou. Taino atu ki tā tātou matu nui te rangi. Mai ki tā tātou kora matua, ki te kaunihera, te pōari. Mai ki a tātou e hui hui mai nei, kei raro te tūni o tēnei whare o tātou. E mihi aroha ki tā tātou Councillor Linda e pāna tana kōrero ki tōna hoa i haere ake ki tū o te aira. Te mihi ake nei rā ki a rātou, ko haere rātou ki te pō uriuri ki te pō tangotango. Nā reira koutou, haere. Nā reira huri noa ki a tātou e hui hui mai nei. E te rangatira e Alf te nākoe. Te mihi ake ki te wiki o te reo i tēnei wā. E tautoko ake ki tā tātou rangatira hoki e a renata e pāna tō mihi ake. Nā kia tātou e hui mai nei. Nā reire te koro matua. E mihi nei rā kia koe, Councillor Penny. E tō tūngā ki te moake ki te mana. Kei konei tā mātou hoa, he awhi kia mātou te kaupapa o te Kite Rukuruku no o rākei hoki he mea, he kai representative mo te runanga o Ngāti Whātua. Taino atu ki tā tātou hoa no Taranaki, engari tōna nohonga i reira, engari hei awhi ki a mātou nei nā ki tā tātou tūhene kei kō, nā koe e tēnā. Nā reire te whānau koutou rā, tēnā koutou. Tēnā koutou huri noa ki te whare, kia ora mai anō rā tātou katoa. Madam Chair, may I please convey and to acknowledge Alf for the wonderful acknowledgements in terms of our attendance here at this hui. And those who have assembled here to listen to the addresses of issues, and certainly we have a very good one called Te Kite Rukuruku. And we have members who are present, and Jane Aikens, who's my manager, will be addressing this kaupapa and introduce some of our members. But Madam Chair, I just want to say this. Can everyone say o? Ra. Kei. O ra kei. Can you say o? Ra. Kei. Madam Chair, that is the word for Te Wiki of Te Reo. Nā reira tēnā koutou. Huri noa ki te whare, kia ora mai tātou.
Ngā mihi Richard mo te mihi mo te komiti o te taiao hapori hoki. He mihi ana ki ngā rangatira, ngā komiti mema, he mihi ana te koromatua, he mihi ana ki ngā mana whenua, Ngātai, ki Tāmaki, Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei, Tururanga o Ngāti Whātua. Tēnā koutou katoa. He mihi ki te kaupapa o tēnei wiki, te wiki o te reo. Tēnā koe. Ko Jane Aiken taku ingoa, ko Paiorangi te wakataranga whenua, ko te ingoa te mahi i tēnei mahi te konihira. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for allowing us to speak to this item this morning. I think I've had an opportunity to address most of you, but my name is Jane Aiken and I'm responsible for the area of co-governance and Māori responsiveness embedded within the Parks, Sport and Recreation Department. I bring apologies from my manager, Mace Ward, for this morning. Acknowledge, as Matua Richard kindly did, Alf, in your address this morning, ngā mihi. Acknowledge Richard for his mihi and acknowledgement of Te Wiki o Te Reo, And as Richard did, also acknowledging my support network, of which is only a small part of a big program here. So to my left, acknowledging Claire Hall, who has played a major leadership role in part of this kaupapa on Te Kete Rukuruku. And as has already been acknowledged, Ngaio Kemp, thanks for joining us. Ngaio is one of the project team members from Mana Whenua. So, Madam Chair, we do have a presentation this morning to take you through the item. I understand that may have been distributed or could be distributed if you haven't already got that. And essentially intend to take you through the what, why, who and how, very briefly, to extract the high-level elements from the report. So Te Kete Rukuruku, as this front slide shows, is really two kaupapa coming together. The first is around Mana Whenua storytelling, and the second is around naming of parks and places and the Mana Whenua role in the tautoko of that. To acknowledge the name Te Kete Rukuruku, which has been gifted to this kaupapa. The words are quite extensive on the screen, and as you've been handed this out, I'll leave you to read that in your own time, but I think the sort of closing statement is quite important. Really the metaphor or the idea behind Te Kete Rukuruku is the wish on Mana Whenua's behalf to nourish new generations through the seeds of treasured story and storytelling. And that storytelling is also done through the naming of parks and places. Today we're largely addressing that portion of the program that relates to the naming of parks and places, so just talking to that project scope, or that part of the project scope. It is about the naming, renaming or dual naming for parks and places. There's obviously an opportunity in there to increase the visibility of te reo, and obviously a lovely opportunity to be able to talk to this kaupapa on Te Wiki o Te Reo. Inherently, that will enable us to share the rich stories and Māori histories and values with our wider community. The project is also, or the program is already playing a great role in strengthening Te Kainihira's relationship with Mana Whenua, and the intent is to continue to do that. So the scope for the Māori naming piece has been developed in partnership with Mana Whenua over quite a number of hui, so about 20 odd hui, that have led us to the point we have today of a process that there is a level of confidence, and we've ironed out, if you like, some of the wrinkles along the way. And it definitely responds to Mana Whenua's experience of the current practice of naming, which in general terms has been described as inconsistent, not always respectful, and often too late. When talking to this kaupapa, especially with our local boards, but with actually a large range of people, we found it very helpful to go through the why. So just, if you'll indulge me for a few minutes and just sort of go through these few slides, which hopefully are very familiar to you. We're starting from the basis that we understand and know that the landscape of Tāmaki Makaurau was rich in Māori names prior to colonialisation, so there is an inherent base of Māori namings throughout Tāmaki Makaurau. There's a very extensive history that obviously canvassed the 100 years prior, but with the change in population, the banning of te reo Māori and the punishment around that banning of te reo Māori, the shift in urbanisation, the mass land sales and confiscations, collectively, as you're all very familiar, this has led to the loss of Māori names for a large part of Tāmaki Makaurau. The great opportunity that I know you'll be familiar with is that with really since 1985, but really only in the last few decades, we've seen a real resurgence and a turnaround, and there's a number of platforms that exist which this program can sit upon, if you like. So one is the very important adoption of the Māori language policy in 2016, a significant move and something that has been really applauded widely whenever I've been talking about this kaupapa. That's mirrored with government agencies all having similar policies and rolling out bilingual signage. We've seen some really bold moves in other cities and towns around Aotearoa, so this is not necessarily a first, but it is early following in the footsteps of other places. And at this very point in time, based on a very high-level macro analysis of 4,130 parks and places we have around the region that are under the control of Auckland Council, including local boards, there is 9% Māori place names and park names. This program represents an opportunity to significantly increase that. We also look in terms of the why to this being an international movement, so we've got a number of examples around the world where Indigenous languages are being celebrated and brought back to the fore, and examples too where that is almost wholly rolled out in bilingual signage around countries and townships. Mentioned before the Māori language policy, but it's been very helpful in taking this back around the local boards to just highlight some elements of that policy to keep the key components omnipresent or at the forefront of our discussion. So those 4 outcome areas are very powerful parts of the policy that we can help deliver on. So to keep the te reo visible, heard, spoken and learnt can certainly be delivered through this program. Ultimately, proclaiming or identifying a number of or a significant increase in Māori place names, park names, will contribute significantly to Auckland's Māori identity being its point of difference in the world. So that's the why. In terms of the who, the tautoko that is existing already in the way in which we've been able to evolve this program thus far, we have support from mana whenua. We have support in the form of projects and funding from 11 local boards. And we have an across council and across CCO project team in place. In terms of the what, or probably the how, should I say, there's a significant amount of work in the process and the way in which we'll go about identifying Māori names. That is the more important piece, but what a lot of the questions often come up is how will this look at the end of the day? So this program is not in the first instance about signage. However, that signage is one of the ways in which the Māori names can be celebrated. So this is just an illustrative slide that helps us understand that we have a large percentage of monolingual English names present throughout Tāmaki Makaurau at the moment. Acknowledging our library colleagues who have been doing a wonderful job of Māori naming of the libraries, and that's the second example. In some ways, the Māori naming of some of our libraries has been more akin to a translation. With working through this over a number of months, we have got the agreement that the appropriate way to go forward with community parks and places is dual naming, and the third example of Taurarua, Judges Bay, is an example of dual naming where both names have unique identities, unique stories. They're not trying to translate each other, they stand alone. That is also acknowledging the Māori language policy with the Māori name being shown first. There is a moemoea, an opportunity, a dream that there could be some locations where monolingual Māori would also be possible, both with the name and potentially even with the component parts of the sign, but that's just an illustrative example. Madam Chair, that's all I wanted to bring from the report in terms of highlighting the key elements of this relatively large program, and happy to take questions.
Well, thank you. Now I know there'll be questions, so let's make sure that we deal with questions first, and then we'll go on to the discussion. Councillor Newman.
Yes, thank you. What I wanted to, a couple of questions actually about how this is all funded. So in your report, because we've been asked to make a decision in principle for a regional approach, but in terms of the financial implications, we're not contributing to that. Why not?
Very good question. So through the Chair, as I was highlighted in the report, we will be coming back next year with a more detailed breakdown of how the implementation could look for regional parks and cemeteries, and that may include a bit more detail on the financial aspect of that. At the moment, until we plan that out and understand a little bit more about the costs associated with it, I'm not able to give you a sort of dollar figure today. There is, at the moment, a regional fund for the wider storytelling program, and that is funding the kind of general aspects of the program, including project management and things like help, internal resources and support for database development. What the local boards have been asked to contribute to, because they are in the first phase of the program of Māori naming is the resourcing required to support mana whenua to go away and do the research and make the decisions. So they're, at this very point in time, are being asked to fund the research and the development of the stories behind the naming. That is not happening for this committee until next year.
Do you have $25,000 to do that? Because I want to support it. I think it's a great idea. I think we should be doing this as a regional approach, and I think if we come up with a regional program, we should fund it regionally rather than set a regional program and then ask local boards to pay the cost of the work around that. So do you have the budget?
So through the Chair, the first part of the question, do I have the budget? So the local boards that are identified in this report, the 11 local boards, have all put forward funding. So we have budget to progress with those local boards. The regional budget is also in place for the program management. The budget required in next financial year for the regional parks and the cemeteries, we are yet to quantify, and we'll be coming back to you on that.
Okay, and can you give me an assurance that, so I've looked at your calculations, so 9% of the 404,130, that's 371 parks potentially with signage. If we're, for example, to go to, say, 30%, that's 1,239, for which we might do dual and monolingual Māori. So that needs to be funded regionally. We're going to be funding that regionally because local boards won't have that budget.
So once again, through the Chair, very good question. I should have highlighted more clearly that the program is largely about the creation of the identification of the names and the stories to go with it. It is not a capital development project. So we're very clearly identifying with local boards as we're going through this that the capital development is something that will need to be delivered following this program. In all cases, local boards have a reasonable number of renewal projects on their books, and so we are very clear that a lot of these names will be able to be delivered in signage through renewals over time.
No, that's if the local boards decide that. That's not if we decide that. That's not for us to determine.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Filipaina.
Tēnā koutou and tēnā koe, Jane. Look, so Te Kete Rukuruku, that's the program around telling unique stories, and we're correct in that.
It's correct.
And a subset of the Māori language policy is naming of parks and places that are not regional, for example, parks in a local board area. Do the local board, who has, I don't like the word jurisdiction, but who has delegation for the naming of parks in local board areas, as in local parks?
Through the Chair, the local boards have that delegation, and just highlighting that paragraphs 16, 17 and 18 of the report talk to where the various decision-making accountabilities sit.
Okay. And so recommendation, and just the last question through you, Chair, recommendation 2 is really for us and the delegation that we have in this committee is around regional parks and cemeteries.
That's correct.
Kia ora. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification, Councillor. I think that's really important. Member Blair.
Kia ora. Me mehea tiki a koe rā e Richard, tō mihi. Mai ki a mātou, ana ki te whakanui te reo, me te maumaharatanga taua nā kuia ko haere te pō. Hai, me mehea tiki a koe rā hei whakapua wai tēnā reo i rungi a tātou a tēnei atāhua. Nō reira, hai, tika ana ko o rākai te kupu. Nā tāne a tāhu i rungi tēnā pukutapu me tā tātou nei puti noho ki te rataha no te kanihira o no rākai. Me mehea tiki a koe. Just saying that in particular the men from Ōrākei are particularly handsome, and also our local councillor sits over here from Ōrākei were referred to as a beautiful flower. So puti is another kupu for today, which is flower. Just a few questions, if I may. Just asking how mana whenua are going to be resourced and supported through this?
Good question through the Chair. There is an acknowledgement that the scale of the program is significant, and the precise sort of cost of resourcing mana whenua to be able to undertake the scale of the job is difficult to predict. However, we've been very transparent on the idea of resourcing mana whenua for bodies of work, and we are working in partnership to continue to fine-tune how we can ensure that resourcing is appropriate.
Okay, and in terms of, on paragraph 25, refers to best practice. Who's part of the crediting this as best practice? Do you have a process for that?
Through the Chair, for the last year or so, we've been developing a number of processes, and I acknowledge Claire to my left, who's worked across the country in this kind of kaupapa. So we are, at this moment, working off anecdotal evidence of what's happening around the country and what the practices are, both nationally and internationally in this regard. But we will increasingly be able to document and test that. At the moment, there isn't a third party, if you like, qualifying that best practice statement.
Okay, and I just wanted to support Councillor Newman in terms of the centralised funding required would be a positive step forward for us. Especially for those, and just attached to that, for those local boards that aren't on the list of 11, do they have the power of veto even if the mana whenua wish to have signage like in my local board, where if the mana whenua wanted to have the name of a park changed, would the Ōrākei local board have the power of veto of that?
Through the Chair, the Ōrākei local board have the accountability for making the decision around the name.
So what would be the best step forward? Would it be to encourage a relationship agreement between the local board and the mana whenua?
Through the Chair, we believe there's a number of steps that could be taken, and one of those that we are very firmly basing the progress of this program on is building success within the local boards that we're already partnering with. This is a massive program, and there's a level of need to pace that program in order to make sure that we are able to successfully deliver. It has a lot of resource required from mana whenua as well as from council. So we think through success we'll build success, but yes, relationship agreements and other opportunities to partner would potentially support that.
Okay, thank you. And just through the Chair, thank you for this. It's great timing for Te Wiki o Te Reo. Our only unique, one of our only unique distinctions around the world is our reo. It's from here and spoken. Having it on signage would allow us to leverage and showcase our city as the great city that it is of Tāmaki Makaurau. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Next is Puti Puti o Ōrākei, Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, my question is, and I did have the financial question, which has been answered, and I did have the how good is this if the local boards don't want to do it question as well. But my final question that I had was around the dual naming and the storytelling. For me, I look at the historic signage, the template that is used. When I was chair of the Ōrākei local board, we put up we named a bay, Biddocks Bay, and we told the story of how it was called Biddocks Bay, all right? Now my problem is naming the example that you've got on your final slide, Judges Bay. You've got a Māori name and the Judges Bay, but you haven't said how it got that. So for me, just forgive me if I use my wrong words, for me just adding a Māori name, which may not be a translation, how would you know if it was a translation or not, just alongside an existing English name, is only half a step to what we were trying to do. Surely we should have a complementary sign somewhere else that actually talks about the story, about how that Māori name came to be chosen and why, potentially, and why the English name got to be chosen and why. For me, just having a name that no one potentially would understand why it was there, if it's not a translation, is only doing it half a job. So could you give me some clarity about how we could expand it and do something to support that?
Tautoko te kōrero, absolutely, that is at the heart of what we are endeavouring to transform through this program. So acknowledging that we haven't necessarily had all the tools in place to be able to not just create the Māori names or reinstate the Māori names, but it's the stories that have been identified time and time again as the rich part of this program. So we are working with our various experts within libraries and with digital. We're working with ATEED, and we're exploring all sorts of opportunities for how we can tell those stories. We know putting stories on signs is not an effective way of getting stories across. We do have some good guidance about how we can sort of put some teasers, if you like, a little hint of what the story might be through our websites, GIS, and on our signs. But it is about having complementary tools. I mean, obviously apps are very popular today, and we've got several apps that we're looking at as an option, but also, you know, other sorts of cloud-based, web-based information. Ultimately, particularly through the broader Te Kete Rukuruku program, the option of this being the cultural infiltration, if you like, of these stories includes through events, through tourism, through education and curricula, etc. So we are keeping a very open mind and exploring a range of options about how we can ensure the stories are not only shared to a little extent on signage, but much more extensively than that.
Great, thank you.
Good question. Thank you, Councillor. And that just reminding us that this is part of a long journey, and you know, starting with the signage is a good start. And I know for areas that have been renamed, I know out west we renamed the sort of Don Buck Massey Park to Te Rangihiroa, which was an opportunity to really get schools and kids and everyone understanding the story of Te Rangihiroa, Don Buck's camp, the Tarara connections with the Croatian, the Māori community. It sort of started a whole amount of energy for that park that wasn't there simply through the renaming or dual naming. Same with Orangahina, Harbour View. It's used comfortably, but we do need the opportunities for people to understand the story. I've got Councillor Walker, Councillor Hills, and hopefully we've covered everybody, and Councillor Fletcher. Councillor Walker.
Wayne Walker. Just got a question around the context of how you're going about the historical aspect, and that's around the relationship of the place and the name of the place with the history of the place, and the opportunity to engage with libraries and heritage to conceivably capture some oral history at the same time, given that you're doing this piece of work, and that would be incredibly valuable. So I just put that out there.
It's a great question, and through the chair I'd also invite in a moment Claire to partially answer that question as one of our leading oral historians in Aotearoa. The first part of your question is that we have a wonderful level of support from our libraries team. You acknowledged them in the earlier item, and I need to acknowledge too the wonderful work they do and they have done to support this project. All of the reports and discussions with local boards start with a reasonably desktop level of research from the libraries team just because of the sheer scale of what we're talking about, but then they've willingly gone into much more in-depth research on a number of occasions. We've also learnt in partnership with our local boards what a rich array of local historians are out there in Tāmaki, and local boards have helped guide us to some of the more sort of active local historians that have helped contribute to that history research in the first instance. But that's all been about understanding the base, understanding what the current stories are, understanding what the current names are about. And I'll ask Claire briefly to speak to the question really about gathering the oral stories as we go.
I te tuatahi, nei rā aku mihi, mahana ki a koutou katoa, I tēnei wiki waki hirihira. Tautoko i ngā mihi kua mihia ki a koutou, ki a tātou. Aira, ko Claire Hall tēnei, kia raro. Kia ora whānau. I just wanted to support the mihi and acknowledgements this morning for Te Wiki o Te Reo, and thank you all for the excellent questions that are coming through for this kaupapa. So through the chair, thank you for your question. I think it's a really pertinent one. What it does is it really highlights the reality that we're dealing with a lot of intangible cultural heritage, a lot of mātauranga Māori in this kaupapa, and I come to this as an oral historian, so it was lovely for me to hear your question. In terms of the storytelling, it is mana whenua-led, so we are relying on our traditional knowledge holders, tribal historians, to come in a partnership way. And I think probably the distinction that's worth making is we're running quite a different oral history model that is used at the moment by libraries, but it is the putakitanga, or the foundation of the way that we work. So you've mentioned local historians, the already very rich collections that are within the library and the heritage collections, and they are certainly on our agenda. The primary focus for this point in the project is developing the relationships with the traditional knowledge holders, tribal knowledge holders, other local historians, and really letting them set the agenda for the way that the storytelling is going to happen. So we've done a fair bit of piloting around that to see how it will work, and a really big part of my work has been putting in place traditional knowledge protections, so that the process that we're involved in, we're talking at the moment about story, and I think that's the very end of a process which demands a lot of interactive and collaborative work around how we look after that knowledge, until it gets to a point where there's an agreement about how it can be used. So I guess that's just a little bit of background for you on the way that we are drawing on the practices that are in place, but also trying to expand on those to make this a very mātauranga focused process.
Through you, Madam Chair. So look, that's a great answer. My hope is that we would do it well, and I would just make the observation that as much and all as we're dealing with Māori place names, we probably ain't done a great piece of work around the European or whatever the other place names are in terms of their substantiation. So maybe that's an issue for another day.
Thank
Madam
you,
Chair,
Councillor.
if I may just note though, if it was a sort of supplementary question, we are in fact gathering a lot of history in one place about the current names through this program, so it has got the added benefit of getting greater knowledge and awareness of the existing English names.
Thank you.
That's a very good point. Councillor Hills.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you again for this. This is not controversial at all, or this should be what we're doing. I think that there are things we could be doing to make this easier for local boards, though. So when I was on Kaipātiki local board, we changed, we obviously had a few parks that we changed, and the new park, O Pakitai, down in Beach Haven, that brought that name back, and the Kaimatara o Waimanawa, which was given to us by Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei, and we're obviously using Te Oniwa Pā as its rightful name in Stokes Point area now. That was not controversial, there was no big deal about it, but sometimes the pathways weren't clear on how we could engage early, and how local boards, if they do want to bed in this work and do it more often, so I assume this is what this is, which is fantastic. But I do have some concerns around local boards who say no, or don't want to, or can't fund some of this work, because I would hate to think that some of our the Māori living in Auckland feel whakamā about this process because of the obvious leaders in their community not wanting to pick this up, or are unable to pick this up. So there must be some way that, yes, there's delegations around changing names, but surely we can still tell those stories somehow. And if it is a web-based, or through the Auckland Council website, that we're just able to bring those in, and it's probably around a regional fund if it's not a local board. But I think there's some, as a council, regardless of the local board view, that we stand up, and this is one of our 3 official languages, it's our Indigenous language. We shouldn't be really allowing that to be missed in certain communities in our city. So I would have real concerns that we create different classes for the access to Māori and our stories, yeah, especially on a week like this. So I have some uncomfortableness around the fact that we may not be doing this across the whole of Auckland, and some of our local Māori are missing out. So, and not just local Māori, the rest, everyone in this community shouldn't be having different versions. So I get it around the naming, but I think if there's opportunities to include te reo on signage, I assume libraries and everything as their regional kind of bodies will continue that right across. But if you have some ideas around how we can ensure that's across, but also around, I don't think this is a big deal. Our rangatahi and everyone going through school right now, this is not an abnormal thing or anything that we should be really debating. But this is fantastic, but I just want to make sure that it's consistent.
So through the chair, if I take what I thought was the seed of the questions in there, is that what could we do to assist the local boards to ensure it's adopted across the region? I think the funding is a little bit of an obstacle for some boards. We haven't had sort of as clear and outright no as was articulated in your earlier item. So
Okay.
I think, I hold a great promise that this will eventually roll out, and it is about just timing and it is about resourcing. I perhaps suggest that when we come back to you in 2019 would be a great opportunity to revisit that question, because we will have had a lot more time to develop the program. We would have hopefully had those successes under our belt, and we would understand a little bit more about what that resourcing challenge is for the scale of the program that we're talking about. I think the second seed of a question I got there was around the comment around the fact that it shouldn't be hard, it shouldn't be anything that's controversial. I talk with that comment. I do think that is potentially a nervousness in some areas about how communities will receive this. So that is a real nervousness. It hasn't at this point in time held up the program. Obviously we've got great support from 11 local boards, but it is potentially one of the other questions that are sitting in the back of some local board minds.
There's always going to be a little bit of raru around, some of these discussions as soon as we raise it. Councillor Hills?
And just one last question, thank you, Madam Chair. Although I semi-agree with the sentiment from Councillor Simpson around signage and maybe in significant sites or major parks, but I think some more thinking needs to be done around, is it just a sign you can get the app or whatever, because I think the cost will rise considerably if we have signage at every park or place name we want to change, and that may be another
Let's make that
barrier.
stage 2.
It's explanation.
Okay, Councillor Fletcher.
Oh, thank you. To a degree, my question has been answered by Jane already. And by the way, congratulations on a really excellent report. So interpretation will be stage 2. That was going to be a question. And if I may shamelessly hijack the meeting on something that is dear to my heart, there was earlier this year, I think it was in March or so, there was a lengthy article by Simon Wilson on Britomart and Mount Eden Station. I'm not as interested on the comments that were made around the Mount Eden Station, but Britomart, which referred to the first rail station being Point Britomart, was a long and challenging process, and there was actually there was a very great desire to change the name of Britomart going back 15 years or so. And I would just urge you, in terms of any work that's being undertaken, and I don't know whether you're working with Auckland Transport or not, for the retention of the name Britomart. I'm very happy for as much interpretation that needs to be made, but that's something I just put in a personal request that consideration be given to that. Thank you.
Councillor Bartley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm just wanting to, be transparent and mindful of any possible perceptions. So I seek your guidance as to whether I have a conflict of interest, given I think my sister-in-law has been contracted to work on this work. So if that's the case, then I'll abstain from the vote on it. Thank you.
I think it's one of those that you have no direct pecuniary interest, Councillor, and it's good, transparent, openness, telling us of that connection. My personal view is that, it's not a conflict, but if you would like to and feel more comfortable, the decision is entirely yours. If you wish to abstain, then please do feel free to do so. No other questions or comments? I think we've probably covered that fully. We'll move to the recommendations. Councillor Philippine.
Just comments?
Yeah, well, we've had sort of a mixture of comments and questions. I am also aware that we've got quite a large agenda still to get through, so I'll go to Councillor Filipaina and Councillor Mike Lee.
It'll only take 30 seconds, Chair.
You are more than welcome, Councillor.
So look, for me, win-win situation. I want to acknowledge the local boards, those that have come on board in regards to this program. I want to acknowledge them because they're willing to put money behind their decision. So I want to acknowledge them. I also, again, and it's been done just to me, to you all in regards to this work. The jewel is awesome. And the reason I say that is because I guarantee when people see the names, they will generate comment in regards to, well, what is that Māori name? What is the whakapapa to that? So, as one of the youngest councillors around this table, at 59, can I just ask, or not ask, but around those little, I don't know what they're called, man, I'm just too old, but you put your phone on the app and it...
QR codes.
Who?
QR codes.
Yeah, that one. I think, you know, this is where we could end up utilising what's available to give that whakapapa to it, because that was done. So, thank you, Chair. This is why I've seconded the recommendation after Matua Blair. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Councillor Filipaina. You young things and your newfangled ideas. Councillor Lee.
Kia ora koutou katoa. Ngā mihi mahana mō te wiki o te reo Māori. Madam Chair, members, I just want to point out a number of concerns I have with this program. They may not be valid, but I want to raise them. I note that regional parks are explicitly mentioned in the recommendation and throughout the report. And I just want to point out to members that nearly 90% of our regional parks have Māori names, and those names were given or formalised by Auckland Regional Pākehā by and large, without much thought, really. They just were appropriate names and the best names to bestow. There are some names that are not Māori, and usually, just about in all cases, but perhaps not in all cases, there were particular reasons for those names, and they usually related to the difficult process of buying regional parks, because buying regional parks was sometimes fraught in the past, and sometimes those names were a condition of purchase. There's one non-English name and one non-Māori name, and that is a Swedish name, and that is Wenderholm Regional Park, and that is therefore a particular reason relating to the Caldry family. It's where Queen Elizabeth stayed during her visit in 1953 and so on. So that's a particular reason for that name. Another interesting name is Archu Creek, which is a hybrid Māori English name, and that name was given at the request of the family, the Chatlanar family, who gave it their enormous sheep and cattle station. They gave it to the people of New Zealand with the request that it not be named after them, but it be named Archu Creek, which is a kind of a traditional hybrid name for that area. So that's where we are with regional parks. I recall there was some difficulty in the naming of one particular park. Mr. Brown will recall that, where I recommended that the name be called Umupuia at the request of the late Mrs. Nyungu Zisler. But unfortunately, as it turned out for me and the people who supported that name, the local people felt that the Duda the pioneering Duda family should be recognised, and democracy having its way, that name was changed to Duda. It was a sensitive matter. However, I mention that to point out that most of these names are completely non-controversial, whether they are Māori or English or even Swedish. However, sometimes they can be controversial and touch on very almost raw feelings in the community. So I sound that as a note of caution. All of these parks are public parks, and therefore if you're going to change the names, you have to recognise that some of them have been around a very long time indeed, and people have close associations with their parks. We know that's why they're popular. You could even say people love their parks. So you have to be careful about historic associations and names and the wider cultural heritage. And I'm talking about, I know this is Māori Language Week, but we also have to recognise there is a majority Pākehā cultural heritage to be mindful of. It doesn't often get said in here, but I think sometimes we need to say it. Public parks are so important that Parliament has deemed it fit to pass legislation governing the management of those parks. So most of these parks are not really up to us to do what we want. They're considered so important that we have the Reserves Act 1977 and the Auckland Domain Act 1987, and of course the Local Government Act 2004. So we have to be mindful that it's not just up to us or even the local boards, but there is a process that in managing parks that we need to take into account. But finally, I'd just like to say, Madam Chair, if the intent seems to be related to the renaissance of the Māori language, te reo Māori, you have to bear in mind that language is a two-way street, utu, back and forward, not just one talking at another. So it's very, very important if you're going to change names, particularly old names. Not a big deal, I don't think, with new names, but with old names, you need to take into account the wishes of the community, the local communities, and the regional communities. In other words, the people of Auckland. Thank you.
Kia ora. Thank you, Councillor Lee, and I think you make some good points that it is a two-way street. Naming was done at a time when Māori was probably not at the stage of consideration as it is now. So for that two-way street, it's now perhaps time for a different discussion with Māori and a more equal discussion. Member Brown.
Tēnā koe o tātou kaihautu, tēnā koutou katoa, hui anō, tautoko hea ki ngā mihi kua mihi te ata nei, e te tuakana Alpha kōrua e te whanaunga. A Richie, tēnā kōrua, koutou katoa e ngā tuihini e hoki mai nei e tautoko te reo karangi tua. Hoi anō, ka rongo ki te kōrero kupu Māori tuatahi o tātou I tēnei wā o rā kei. He tautoko engari ka rongo ki te kupu tuaru o tātou I tēnei ata. Umu. Poia. Umu poia. I whakapiripiri mai e te reo o te moana nui a kiwa, o mātou I tēnei taha o Aotearoa hei Māori, he kotahi, he whanaungatanga o tātou ki te kupu I te ingoa o Umapuia no reira. Pāna ki te kupu I te mohio ana ko te waiwera, ko te ingoa o Umapuia, so hot water ne, no reira. Just a little comment, and I acknowledge Councillor Lee It was fitting that you mentioned Dumupuia, because you were almost taking my wind out of my spinnaker.
Never do that, James.
But if I heard and if I understand the initiative right, it's actually potentially an opportunity to complement, if I could say, as opposed to challenge or confront the existing. However, the pātai I have is that of the kehua, hey? The kehua. So the kehua in this case meaning the manu I can't see, being Umupuia, located within the local board of Franklin. So my pātai is, my understanding, Franklin would have a wealth of parks, yet are in a mission in the local board sense at the moment. So pātai o kia koutou. You know, how are we going on that journey, and what is it, if anything, that the committee and our elected members can do to encourage our board, notwithstanding the challenges that they're facing, to assist and invigorate the initiative, given that the wealth of potential domain that they're the authority of, in my eyes, is a kehua insofar as a huge emission at the moment.
Kia ora, Member Brown. Through the chair, the question is similar to the one that Member Hills, or Councillor Hills raised. I think the board hasn't, as far as we're aware, said no to this kaupapa. They are simply challenged potentially by the cost and potentially by their priorities at the moment. So I think the opportunity is to reintroduce or to continue to go back to the board and invite them to participate. We do believe that we can do a better job of taking some of the boards that aren't yet part of the program through a more in-depth understanding of where the program is at, because you're right, there are a huge number of opportunities and there is a great partnership with Mana Whenua, particularly in the Franklin area. So the project team will be going back to the local board and representing the kaupapa and seeking them to reconsider that. What the committee can do, essentially, potentially the question around the financial barrier is one that keeps on coming up. We'll come back to you about some ideas around that, and obviously any kōrero that the committee members wish to have with the board may also be of assistance.
Tēnā koutou.
Kia ora, Member Brown. I think we might be ready to put the recommendation. Councillor Casey.
I just want to congratulate Dean Kimpton on getting Claire Hall on our staff. I haven't seen her for 20 years, saw her for the first time this morning. Brilliant move, absolutely brilliant.
Excellent, that's a very good addition.
One quick
Councillor
comment.
Newman. Yep.
I'm sorry.
Last comment.
Thank you. It is very important that, look, having my short time around here, probably the biggest challenge that I've seen with respect to how we move a regional policy decision with local implications that relate to signage is smoke-free. It has not been a particularly easy time. I don't want to presume that local boards are not embracing of the direction here. They might, but my presumption is that the challenge for the boards is how to resource this. So I do hope that when you report back that you can provide some options and recommendations for a regional response which is regionally endorsed, so regionally resourced, so as to complement the work of the local boards, because I'm just not comfortable with relying on a renewals program around signage and parks delivered by local boards. That will take a long time, because in the greater scheme of things, local boards have to do so much with limited resourcing, and renewals has been a challenge. And if you have to rely on the renewals program, I think it kind of, to me, thinks that the opportunity to really progress this in a very positive way will be diminished somewhat by the slowness of the renewals and the task of doing the work in those parks, which is wider than signage itself. So please come back with some recommendations for how you are going to resource this regionally to complement local board decision making and renewals.
Okay, so that might be thinking that this committee is the policy and strategy side of things. We can actually have a report that comes back to this in the appropriate time frame. I mean, this is going to take quite a while because there's quite a bit of discussion to have with boards. We do need to establish where are the barriers. Is it funding, or is it some boards simply don't wish to participate in the process? And at the moment we're working with the willing. I think that's the sensible way. But if we can have a slightly more fleshed out discussion on the financial implications and the financial barriers, I think that would be a good discussion to come back to us in conjunction with the Finance Committee. So we'll take that as our next steps. I'm going to put the recommendations.
But Madam Chair, could
Councillor?
I'm sorry to come in at the last minute, could I ask to see reflected in the recommendations our endorsement of the importance of the local boards and the need to take into account or to include the views of the public when it comes to name changes?
Councillor, if you read the policy, that is enshrined well in the policy. However, we need to be really clear that this is a process that we're embarking on with the local boards that will be worked in partnership with local iwi and Māori. They will gift the name. This isn't a public consultation process, so we don't then go out and ask the public what they think. This is a gifting process, a respectful gifting process by Māori for that place.
This
And
is a
the
gift the
dual-
public have to receive.
But-
Maybe that's not the best way to achieve the outcome, Madam Chair. I just think
guess-
including the public is a principal thing to do on a public park.
With the greatest of respect, that hasn't necessarily resulted in a huge proliferation of Māori place names. The policy sets out clearly what the process is. You're free to vote against it, Councillor. I'm going to put the recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against?
Aye.
Councillor Sayers, you wish your name recorded as no?
No, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Stewart, you'll no as well? No other no's? Thank you. That's passed. Appreciate that. And to the team, kia ora, and thank you so much for the hard work done with this. Richard, thank you for your mihi and for the kind words at the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can I just say, Madam Chair, that thank you for listening to our kōrero. In line with Te Wiki o Te Reo and in line with tikanga, we would like to sing a brief waiata. Ti tiro mai ngā iwi, tātou tātou e. Tu tiro mai ngā iwi, tātou tātou e. Whai a te marangatanga, me te aroha e ngā iwi, kia putaputahi, kia putahira, tātou tātou e.